dear guests, dear parents, and above all, students and graduates. It is a deep honor for me to be here today at the ceremony marking the conclusion of your studies on the European Master's Program in Human Rights and Democratisation, but marking also the inauguration of the new academic year. I believe that it is no coincidence that you have chosen Venice as location and seat for your project as your real home. An extraordinary city, a millenary crossroads among peoples, cultures, traditions, and innovations, a beacon of freedom of thought and civic participation, and, upon all, an admirable example of nature that has given a safe shelter for mankind during the barbarian invasions, a city which today is clamoring to be defended from pollution and climate change brought about by the barbarism of mankind's decisions, renewing a pact of mutual fidelity which, during the Doge's era, took shape in the so-called Sposalizio del Mare, the sea wedding. This is certainly a very important moment for you and for your families, but it is equally important for the community and for the practice of human rights that the global campus is helping to establish and shape. Today, you will be leaving one of the most prestigious human rights education institutions in the world, to which Europe has lent its financial backing for some time. The Memorandum of Understanding the European Parliament signed with the global campus set out a clear approach focusing on human rights education, the Human Rights Network, and ultimately on you. We need you more than ever. My hope is that you will soon take up positions in international, governmental, and non-governmental organizations, in national and local government, in the media, in international courts, and in the private sector as well, on these or in other continents. I express this hope because the expertise and quality of these institutions' alumni profiles is remarkable. Your contribution will be crucial. You have a real task to perform. You will not merely be involved in addressing the challenges that await us. No, you will soon be taking the lead. I would like to begin by saying a few words about this breathtakingly beautiful place. The Scuola Grande di San Rocco is a home to a lay confraternity dedicated to the patron saint who offers protection against epidemics, which is doubly appropriate in the current circumstances. Epidemics return, history repeats itself, taking forward and backward steps. Questions and problems arise repeatedly over several generations. It is the answers that may change. The same goes for human rights. This is a difficult period. We should not deny it clearly, but we must look at the bigger picture. Some periods in history have seen astonishing progresses. This includes the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, the two international covenants setting clear universal human rights standards to be attained together with specific conventions placing respect for human dignity at the core of the international community's values. This also includes the birth of the United Nations and thus of multilateralism and the establishment of the International Criminal Court. Only 2 years ago, I organized in Rome, together with the Parliamentarians for Global Action, of which I'm honored to be a member since 6 years, a high-level conference to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Rome Statutes. Together with distinguished jurists, judges, and former judges of the court, and many fellow parliamentarians from all over the world, we reaffirmed the importance of the court's role. Most importantly, it was an occasion to honor this anniversary by exerting all possible pressure to strengthen the support and the resources available to the court to enable it to fulfill its task. Nowadays, we observe, on the contrary, attempts to erode the functioning of the court and to undermine the international justice system, which the objective is to revert to a simple logic of power, brute military and economic strength, an endeavor that we cannot and must not tolerate. You are the heirs to the international legal order developed by a world that rebuilt itself after the war, defeated smallpox, fed a growing population, and enabled more than 1 billion people to escape extreme poverty. These progresses are not a matter of chance or fate. It is the fruit of a tireless work of individuals who displayed resolve and perseverance. There is no denying that we are living in difficult times and that the tasks awaiting you are not about to get any easier. The challenges in this year, like no other when an epidemic has overwhelmed us, are clear for all of us. In an increasingly interdependent world, countries and in some cases world powers have adopted attitudes which fuel rivalry and conflict or vie with one another to achieve a leadership role in the service of their own interests. This period is also marked by a growing number of voices arguing in favor of sovereignty and cultural specificities, ultranationalism, through limiting the exercise of the right of fundamental freedoms and reducing further space for civil society and opposition. It is often free voices like human rights defenders who protect the rights of the community and in particular of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable people who are targeted. In some contexts, the narrative is that safeguarding civil and political rights must take second place to economic and social rights, for example, measures to lift people out of poverty. We trust that you will join us and stand up for the principles of universality and indivisibility of human rights, which are the birthright of all human beings without distinction. You too will be standard bearers for these core principles. And let us consider first the principle of multilateralism. For evidence, the multilateralism is under threat. We need to look no further than the recent attacks against Fatou Bensouda, prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. The establishment of the International Criminal Court was such a crucial step towards safeguarding basic rights and fighting against impunity for the worst crimes that is almost impossible to believe that personal sanctions could actually be imposed against the chief prosecutor. It is also difficult to believe that the partner country decided to withdraw from the World Health Organization at the height of the pandemic, as it was difficult to understand the decision of withdrawing from the EU-backed agreements reached after protracted negotiations with Iran. Multilateralism is the only safe way to forge ahead towards a world order based on international law and universal norms. Many now argue that multilateralism has been weakened to such an extent that all we can do is maintain the status quo, fall back on the defense of basic principles. However, I urge you not to lose hope and not to lose sight of the bigger picture once more. Throughout history, it has often been the case that step forward has been followed by steps back, only for events to then move ahead again, perhaps even faster than before. Changes that sometimes seem to have happened overnight are often, in fact, the result of long years of perseverance. And despite the attacks on the International Criminal Court, the fight against impunity is now being waged in new ways, such as through developments in universal jurisdiction, whereby, for example, crimes committed in Syria are being investigated and punished under the German law. So do persevere. And now, in this annus horribilis, we come to the impact of COVID-19 and its repercussions for human rights. I shall focus on 3 issues which have been priorities for our Parliament over the past few months, and in particular for the Subcommittee on Human Rights, and which will have a major impact on your work when you come to deal with human rights on a practical level, on the ground. First, the emergency measures. Faced with an unforeseen threat to public health, most governments took far-reaching emergency measures, as Professor Novak was saying before me, that severely restricted fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of expression, association, assembly, and movement. While many governments are striving to cope with the pandemic as best as they can, respecting the principle of proportionality, the response is that some countries around the world have come up with raise important issues. The problem is that measures taken in exceptional circumstances could remain in force for a very long time. Here are just a few examples. The imposition of censorship in order to counter fake news, the use of digital surveillance tools not only to track the spread of infection, but also to monitor citizens' political behavior. Dissidents, activists, journalists, lawyers, video makers, even musicians are being imprisoned as the world looks on. It is worrying that COVID-19 is being used as a pretext for introducing repressive measures to clamp down on the voices of criticism or dissident, or on religious, ethnic, or sexual minorities and vulnerable groups. Second, migrants and the people without a legal status. COVID-19 has highlighted the fact that protecting the population as a whole is possible only if the most vulnerable are protected. That we are protected if everyone is protected. A clear example is provided by refugees, migrants, and displaced persons. Migrants and refugees are often confined to camps and settlements or live in overcrowded urban areas. They are individuals at risk, and their right to health is being disregarded. These people do not have a voice, they are stigmatized and become targets of hate speech. The pandemic is showing us that everyone must be protected, otherwise nobody is protected. We need to provide assistance and ensure that everyone's right to health is safeguarded, otherwise nobody will be saved. The right to health, as with other fundamental rights, cannot be conditional on a person's status, whether it be that of a citizen, a refugee, or a person with no status at all. There must be a firewall between discussions on someone's status and his right to medical assistance. And third, political prisoners. Another issue that is a clear priority in our parliamentary work day by day is the imprisonment of human rights activists and peaceful political activists during the pandemic. From the outset, we endorse the appeal made by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, who expressed concern at the conditions in which the most vulnerable people were being held and called for the immediate release of peaceful human rights defenders and activists. These people should never have been imprisoned in the first place, and certainly not in the midst of a pandemic, putting their health and lives at serious risk. In more and more countries, unfortunately, human rights defenders are being taken into preventive custody without safeguards and without even being informed of the charges against them. In many parts of the world, hearings to renew a pretrial detention order are often held in the absence of the defendants and their lawyers. What we are looking at here is the denial of the right to a fair trial at the time when the authorities should release prisoners for whose detention there are no proper legal grounds or who have pre-existing medical conditions. The state of affairs is compounded by the fact that access to prison for civil society and international organizations which have a specific mandate to visit detainees is currently even more restricted than ever. The challenges you will face from tomorrow onwards are many, and therefore, if we are to address them, we need not only courageous activists, but also courageous and brave and fearless institutions. Institutions are rightly being asked to demonstrate courage at least equal to that shown by human rights activists and defenders, to hold firm to their ambitions, to be bold in addressing challenges, to dare to highlight problems, to raise issues, to initiate public debate, to raise their heads above the parapet by making their views clearer, to step up the pressure in negotiations, both publicly and in the talks held behind closed doors, which are part and parcel of diplomatic activity. The European Parliament, which I am representing here, is an important voice in this scenario. Through its plenary and committee work, its Sakharov Prize, its parliamentary diplomacy, and a constant dialogue with all official and non-official representatives. Of course, advocacy is difficult. Sometimes we have a feeling that we are not getting results, and sometimes that feeling is right. But let's be clear, the European Parliament remains one of the world's most vocal, most outspoken, and least fearful institutions. How can Europe help you in your future work? The EU, as it takes on a more active geopolitical role, must continue to champion human rights. As Ursula von der Leyen said in her State of the Union speech in September, we must always condemn human rights abuses wherever and whenever they occur. What can hold us back from doing so? Timidity, or the thought that if we ignore problems, they will disappear by itself? They will not disappear. The Commission President's Office has even announced that it will be proposed a qualified majority vote when it comes to human rights issues and related sanctions. This move promises to be a game changer, potentially leading fresh impetus to human rights policy, generating renewed momentum, an opportunity to be seized, because there can be no Europe without human rights, which are the very foundation of the European project, as there can be no human rights action without a strong European commitment on board. However, the European Union should definitely work on its exercise of double standards when it comes to human rights. Let me be very frank on this. If we want to be credible when, as a collective body, demand that non-EU countries address their human rights violation, we should also avoid turning a blind eye when human rights are violated by our strategic and economic partners, as well as even within the EU itself. Every time the EU proves to be strong with the powerless and weak with the powerful, every time we let geopolitical or economic considerations prevail over the principle on which the Union is founded, we are eroding a little bit of that credibility that allows us to be incisive in our action and a real champion of human rights. For the EU to achieve maximum impact, it is necessary to remain firmly anchored to such values which also distinguish the Union's action on the international scene from other major players, because, as elegantly expressed by the politologist Joseph Samuel Nye, seduction is always more effective than coercion, and many values like democracy and human rights and individual opportunities are deeply seductive. Nonetheless, we must cherish what we have accomplished so far in the field of human rights and democracy. I am confident that thanks to the new generation, we will continue to strengthen our support to all those who defend human rights in their country at the risk of their life and of the one of their family. This support needs to be as comprehensive as possible, including by taking them in, thereby putting an end to the persecution in their home countries, which makes flight the only option. The number of cases of human rights defenders in need of protection is increasing all the time. The new modus operandi of authoritarian governments is to threaten activists and human rights defenders in their homelands and even sometimes on the European soil, and to harass their families when they are abroad. Their protection is of great importance for our Parliament. The Protect Defenders program, which seeks to offer refuge, safety and peace of mind to human rights defenders, is unique in the world, and the EU Parliament, our Parliament, is very proud of it. To conclude, today is a day of celebration, a day of joy, and I wish you every success in your careers and in your lives. Yes, the challenges are daunting, but the opportunities are also unprecedented, and tools at our disposal more effective than ever. In this interconnected world in which information circulates instantaneously, we know immediately what is happening almost everywhere in the world. We can devise new measures and innovative strategies to defend rights and improve people's lives. As it is very well expressed in a Native American proverb attributed to the native chief Seattle as a piece of wisdom about generational stewardship of land and nature, we do not inherit our land from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. This is exactly the same for our planet. This is exactly the goal we have to achieve implementing the SDGs goals. That is why all of us, citizens, states, and institutions, need you. We need your knowledge, your commitment, your ambition, your energy, and very soon, your leadership. And one very, very last suggestion, and encouragement indeed: never, never allow anyone to tell you that you are too young to make the difference. Thank you.